This is the place.
If you have an aunt in another city, you're the one that makes sure she gets her food and stuff sent from Costco.
Like when I was
You're a
22.
caregiver. You're providing care to someone.
Hello and welcome to the A.R. Bernard Show. This is your host, A.R. Bernard. Over the MLK weekend, I was involved in many, many different activities, and one of them was sitting down and having an interview with Pastor Tony Lowden. Pastor Lowden was the pastor of former President Jimmy Carter, and how he became Jimmy Carter's pastor is quite an interesting story. We talk about the funeral, which he officiated. We talk about some of the things that went on at the funeral, and we talk about the climate of things at a time that he became Jimmy Carter's pastor. It's a great story. You don't want to miss any part of it. So join me now as we go into that conversation with my guest, Pastor Tony Lowden. If you notice, set design is a little bit different because we are coming to you right from here in Atlanta, Georgia. And Pastor Tony Lowden, you have a church here in what part of Georgia?
Byron, Georgia. It's called J. Bass Ministries.
All right, so
it's right in the middle of the state, right below Macon, Georgia.
All right, so that's a good distance from Atlanta.
2 hours from Atlanta.
Why there?
It's the heart of Georgia, right? And that's where I live, but more importantly, that's where a lot of people need help, you know. And there's some other churches in that area, but I'm on the side where there's a lot of people that are living below poverty. There's a lot of people that has failing school systems. There's a lot of men and women who are in and out of prisons in those areas. So I want to make a difference and take part of that territory, take it back and give it back to the Lord.
And you've heard his heart right there. But we're going to begin with the passing of President Jimmy Carter. You've been a long-time friend of the family, officially Jimmy Carter's pastor, and you were at the funeral services, and we'll talk about that. But let's begin with your relationship with President Carter. How did that come about?
It was very interesting. There was a gentleman by the name of Doug Unger who asked me to come and preach down in Plains, Georgia, and I kept telling him, Doug, I can't, I'm really busy. And Doug was a member of Kairos. Him and I were in and out of prisons all around Georgia, going and doing Kairos in prisons for men and women in prisons around the state. And he kept telling me, I really need you to come. I really need you to come. So I said, okay, Doug, I'll come down. You arrange it, I'll do it. I had no idea that Maranatha Baptist Church was President Carter's church. Had no idea. So I went down there on a Sunday and I preached about love, right? And the fruits of the spirits. And I get there, President Carter's in the audience with his wife. The place is packed. When President Carter was teaching Sunday school, people would come and sleep in the parking lot on Saturday night. Hundreds and hundreds of people park their vehicles, sleep in their cars or their trailers to get in the church on Sunday. It blew my mind that there were so many people there. Secret Service come and sweep the whole church. You got to get patted down. You got to get a wall and everything to get inside. He teaches Sunday school, and then I'm preaching that day. It blew my mind. So I preached on love. And so the very next day, I get a message, 229 phone number. I didn't recognize it. I was driving to Atlanta because at that time I was working for Governor Nathan Deal doing criminal justice reform. So like we all do, I didn't recognize the number. I pushed it to voicemail. And it was President Carter saying, hi, Tony, this is President Carter. I really enjoyed you preaching. The church loved you. And we would like to know, would you be our interim pastor? And if you like us, we would love for you to be my pastor.
Wait, one sermon did it?
One sermon.
You hear that, all you preachers out there? One sermon can put you in that kind of a position, all right?
And the most amazing thing about that is that I'm driving to work early in the morning. I have his phone number. I'm listening to his message, and I pull off on the side of the road, and you know when you get those divine moments and the Holy Spirit is in the car with you and you trying to figure out what is God telling you. I'm making $160,000 a year working for the state government, and you're asking me to come down to Plains, Georgia, where there's a railroad track that goes right down the middle, and blacks live on one side and white lives on the other side here in the 2000s. And the city's still divided, and it's an all-white church. And so I'm debating, do I call him back? And all of a sudden I said, okay, I got enough courage. I got his cell number. Let me call him back. And we sat there on the side of the road, talking for about an hour and a half. Me and the 39th president. And he's telling me why he wants me to be his pastor, why he wants me to come down the plain, how he wants black and white churches to worship together. That is his passion, his heart, to bring them together about the gospel and do away with this religion that teaches hate or points to people unclean, unclean, unclean. And I was shocked because here's one of the greatest humanitarians in the world who probably has direct access to heaven, asking me to be his pastor. The fact that he wanted me to help him and his wife get closer to God in their latter days, it humbled me. You brought me to tears in the car.
But that was a major life change for you.
Oh, man.
To make that kind of a decision, to give up, that position. And the congregation was predominantly white or all white?
It was all white.
It was all white.
Yes.
And he's talking about bringing in a black pastor.
Yes.
In that context.
Yes.
And begin to lead. Yeah, it says a lot about him. And we'll talk about, who he is as a person, understanding behind the scenes. So you made a decision to accept that responsibility.
I talked it over with my wife, and she couldn't understand that I would leave that job working for the state and go down and be his pastor full time.
Of course not. She knows the numbers.
The numbers don't work. And then I went and talked it over with the pastor. I was a youth pastor at a big church in Warner Robins, Georgia, 6,000 members, and I'm the youth pastor. And I talked to the pastor, and he said, I'm not sure if I would do it because they just want you to make you a prop. And that, it bothered me a little bit because the Lord that I serve specializes in making us all props, right? Damascus moment with Paul, he was a prop, right? To be able to take what he knew about the law and be able to write about grace in the
But it was
New
a fair concern.
Yes.
I mean, you have a situation like that. You wonder, am I going to be used?
Right.
How am I going to be used? Is this a token situation? Those are legitimate questions that you had to work through, but you came to a conclusion.
Yeah, I got in my prayer closet and prayed, and I said, okay, Lord, I'll go. Because in 1979, Maranatha Baptist Church was founded. 20 members left Plains Baptist Church, a Southern Baptist church, because that church would not allow a black man, a preacher, to join that church. And Jimmy Carter and Rosalynn Carter and 20 other members left that church because of that one issue and founded Maranatha Baptist Church. And so that rich history there even pulled me even more towards wanting to take the assignment.
So he wasn't pulling rank because he was president.
That's
he was
right.
actually involved in the founding of that particular church.
Yes.
And making decisions, leadership decisions
Yes.
as to its future. So how soon after the invitation did you relocate, bring your family in, and settle into that pastoral role?
Well, the agreement I made with my wife, I was not going to relocate. I commuted, and that's 2 hours from my house. Every Sunday, every Wednesday, I commuted up and down those long agricultural roads, driving to Plains, Southwest Georgia, from Middle Georgia down to Plains, Georgia. And it was a sacrifice to keep my family together because there's no school system in Plains, Georgia. So my daughter couldn't go to school there. I would have to move her someplace else into another county to go to school. It is truly a rural, small community with not much there.
Wow. But you made the decision.
Yes.
You were commuting. For how long? did
8
that
years.
Go on? 8 years. 8 years. After those 8 years, what happened?
Well, I ended up going to the White House and working for President Trump, a job that President Carter told me I had to take because he said, when your country calls you to serve, you answer the call. He said, I just got one question for you. Are you still going to be my pastor? So I would come home every weekend from D.C. and continue to minister to him during that time. And the church started getting what I call political.
That's the next question, because that's at the end of those 8 years, you transitioned. You ended up going to the White House, working for President Trump. How did the congregation initially receive you, or did they receive you?
Half received me and half didn't. Because, during that time, 2016, 2020, our nation and our churches, everyone started getting really divided.
Yeah.
And the church embraced that. Some start worshiping the donkey, some start worshiping the elephant. And here I am trying to teach about the lamb. And we still have that today in some cases. And that made it very difficult. And so I end up starting J. Bass Ministry and leaving Maranatha Baptist Church.
As a result of that.
Yes.
Talk about those years, those 8 years more in greater detail, because here you are. I'm sure that when you were presented to the congregation, President Carter made it clear that this was his choice, along with, the rest of the leadership. And you're preaching every Sunday. You're looking out at an audience that is divided, not just politically, but divided over you and your presence there.
Yeah.
What was that like? 8 years, man. Let's see, 52 Sundays a year times 8 years. Quite a few Sundays.
Yeah, and I took no vacations. It was difficult, but the biggest thing, I saw God in it all the time. And President Carter was very intentional with teaching me about Southwest Georgia. I remember one time I was running late on a Saturday to come to visit him. And we always had these Saturdays where we would get together and sit down at his house, Miss Rosalynn and ourselves, and we'll watch the baseball game. We'll watch Army and Navy if they're playing. We had all these different things we would do. But this Saturday, he said, "Where are you?" And I'm running late. I'm 10 minutes late. And he said, "Where are you?" I said, "I'm about 10 minutes out." He said, "Well, hurry up and get here." I pull into the presidential compound. Secret Service already have him in a Ford 150 truck. Miss Rosalyn's on one side in the back. He's on the other side. There's other Secret Service lined up. Amy Carter's in a car. The A's are in a different car. He says, "Tony, get in the middle here. We're going for a ride." He takes me to Reentry, Georgia. In Reentry, Georgia is this unmarked gravesite. This unmarked gravesite for African Americans. And he goes over to Bishop William Decker Bonner, his headstone. He said, "You see this bishop right here? This is the man that introduced me to Christ. He's a black man who could not come on the porch of my father's house on our farm, but he would stand by the fence and talk to my father about the conditions and how we should treat the other African Americans working for us." Over here is Rachel Clark, the woman that would take me fishing, teach me all about Christ, teach me all about what I should do when I become a man and marry a woman, teach me about love. He said she made a major impact in my life. So if you go to the Carter Center, you see pictures of both of them at the Carter Center. And then he goes over, he says, "You see this grave site right here? This father here, he fought in World War I. His son fought in World War II. He said, I want you to understand the impact that African Americans have played in this nation and in my life." He's in a wheelchair. There's a blanket over his legs. It's cold, and that blanket has Psalms 23 on it. And they're pushing him around. He's telling me, and I'm afraid because these are old grave sites. They're not kept up. The ground is weak. I'm afraid we're going to fall in. But he is being intentional. Well, giving me a rites of passage into the history of what African Americans have done in his life. So it's no wonder why he ended up becoming president, appointing more African Americans to positions than any other president combined to this day. And so I will never forget that moment in my entire life.
Wow, that's amazing. So over the 8 years, you grew in your relationship, of course, with the Carter family and with President Carter. Did things change with the congregation over time? Or did they remain the same?
They remained the same because, if you drive down the middle of Plains in an election year, you'll see Republican signs on one side of the road and Democrat signs on the other side of the road. And it's interesting. They're all friends and they all grew up together. They're all in different schools. But when it comes to their politics, they fight like as though they're in a UFO wrestling match, right? And so, and they're serious about their politics in that area. It's a very conservative town. President Carter was too conservative for Democrats, and he was too liberal for Republicans. And I believe he was caught in this middle, because I believe that what he learned as a Christian, it produced what I call faith and hope, and they became his guardrails to everything he did. So when you look at him raising his right hand, when he joined the Navy, he kept that covenant. When he raised his right hand and became a state senator after he left the Navy, he kept that covenant to serve. When he raised his left hand to become a governor of Georgia, his right hand to become governor of Georgia, he kept that covenant. He wanted to serve. And then when he raised his right hand again on the Bible and he became president of the United States, even when the country rejected him and kicked him out of public housing, he remembered that when he left the Navy, the only house that he can afford for him and his wife was the projects. They went into the projects in Southwest Plain to live. So he truly went from the public housing, from the projects to the White House, and then back to Plains, and he kept the covenant. He kept serving. We don't find many people like that.
There were those who said he was too soft. A lot of criticism around his presidency. One-term president. He tried to live out his Christian conviction, but it seemed that he struggled to navigate amongst individuals who were not necessarily Christian or following the Christian way, within a context that was not as moral as he may have believed or hoped. Do you think that he served a purpose being there? And if so, what purpose did he serve?
Absolutely. We got to look at history. Our nation had no confidence in our government. We were just getting over Richard Nixon. Right. And Gerald Ford.
Watergate scandal, all those things,
And he came at a time where he gave America hope. He was an outsider coming in.
He also gave integrity.
That's
he gave things like character and moral standards. All of the things that we wanted
and still want today.
In reaction to Watergate, in reaction to a Richard Nixon. Right? And then when we got it, we didn't appreciate it. We didn't want it anymore.
And there was people working behind the scenes. I remember one Saturday I went down to President Carter. I said there was an article in the New York Post where a lieutenant governor from Texas was apologizing to you for what he did behind the scenes in the Middle East to make sure that the hostages would not be released. And he goes, what? I said, yes. And so I read him the article. And I said, this man said he needs to apologize to you because he was wrong. He said, well, tell him I forgive him. I said, really? He said, yes. And then Miss Rosalynn, sitting on the other side of the sofa, says, I'm not sure if I forgive him. She said, because we could have done a lot of good stuff on our second term. And here they are in the 90s. He's forgiven people that turned against him. That was in the Republican Party. He's saying it's okay. That's politics. I've never seen someone who gives so many people grace and want to fix things. And all the things that he went and did across the waters politically was to try to stop wars and bring hostages homes and fight for democracy. He did all those things because he was called to it. Oftentimes we retire on our faith.
And he saw it more than a political win. It was a calling.
It was a calling.
His attachment to his faith, his roots in his faith, really shaped and informed his perspective on things. I remember listening to him speak about it on several interviews, and he actually considered the presidency a call of God, to serve his nation. But again, it was short-lived. And unfortunately, that's a pattern.
That's right.
In American society, I was at a men's meeting talking to the men, and we talked about the fact that post-World War II, every president who came across as weak, wimpish, and talking about building bridges and peace lost the election. And every presidential candidate who came across as tough and alpha dog strong and was able to portray their opponent as wimpish and weak, they ended up winning the election. It says a lot about who we are as a nation. Of course, when we got to Barack Obama, that was a different story because now, a different element is introduced. But it speaks to who we are as a nation and what we value, what we prioritize. Would you say that President Carter's philanthropic and humanitarian work was greater than his presidency?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, because it continued. You know, the title of the eulogy that I preached for him was Called by Two Books. Mm-hmm. And I got the idea because, I went to the Carter Center with him one day, and he's giving me a tour of the Carter Center in his office. And outside of his office is this massive book. The book is called The Presidential Duties. And it's this big black book. It's massive. And it has all the duties of the President of the United States. When to appoint Supreme Court justices, how to pass the laws, executive orders. It gives it all the duties. It's like a job description for the President of the United States. But he also had another black book called the Bible. And both those books called him to his purpose that he had for 100 years here on this earth.
Yeah, and he was unapologetic in his relationship with his faith and his openness to let people know where he stood. The funeral, all right? You gave me a call before he passed. You're letting me know that, it looks like he's coming to the close of his life. And we prayed together, and you were now preparing for what was ahead. And it takes place, National Cathedral, and, there's the who's who of presidents present, and you were involved. What was that like, your involvement?
It was the toughest thing in my life. One, because I'm grieving a friend, right? And President Carter was like a father to me. I grew up in a trap house in North Philadelphia, a mother who ran the trap house in North Philadelphia. And for some of the viewers that might not know what a trap house, bootleg, speakeasy house, right, with all the things that take place in that house. And I never knew my father. I couldn't describe him to this day. I couldn't tell you what his voice is like. But President Carter treated me like a son. I was his pastor, but he treated me like a son. Every time I go to visit him, he would ask me 4 questions. Where have you been? What have you done? Who have you helped? And how can I help you help them? Those 4 questions have become the foundation of my ministry, who I am to this day, because I want to be able to answer those 4 questions at any time in my life. But there at the National Cathedral, seeing all the things that took place, I mean, we the day before, we walked down Pennsylvania Avenue after the Navy Memorial, where we pulled him with horse and caisson. To see the soldiers out there, to see the military in full colors, to see the unmanned horse out there in the cold, and to see people lined up on the roads in the cold saluting him. But prior to that, leaving Georgia and driving through Republican counties and seeing Republicans with flags out, waving and saluting their Georgia son, celebrating his life. And then come to the National Cathedral with the stained glass, the history of the National Cathedral and everything that takes place there. And I had a ringside seat right behind the podium where every speaker, I was right there behind them. And then to see all the other presidents and see Biden get up there and all these people come to this place. To see the Supreme Court Justice, the Prime Minister of Canada, all these major people with power, all the Congress and Senate all on one side. And then the friends of Jimmy Carter's all on one side. It was unbelievable. It blew my mind. It was like if I was in a movie just watching it all play out. The toughest part for me was to give the pastoral prayer. And right after that, we did the commendation. And the commendation is where they would escort me to the casket right there in the center. And 4 of the bishops would surround the casket. And we would do the prayer of the commendation or their committal. And that was the toughest thing for me. To right there to say goodbye to my friend in front of the world. But I was reminded of the challenge that he wanted me to do for him. And that is to bring both black and white together in a service to worship.
And you were the only person of color.
I was the only person of color
that
surrounded
was
that casket.
in the whole thing.
Yes.
Yeah, I watched. I was proud of you, of course, watching you in that mix, and the fact that the family made sure that you were a part of that. Because when it comes to the ecclesial world, they'll take over and dominate it.
Yes.
But I thought it was so important for you to be there and do what you did. Your thoughts on, his grandson who
Jason.
stole the show.
Jason has a lot of talent.
Yeah.
I sure hope that he runs for office. I sure hope that he end up taking his grandfather's legacy and carry it on and continue that leadership, that servant leadership. He has it in him. He's doing a lot of great things, being on the board for the Carter Center still. His young boys are winning every debate there in the Debaters Club. I mean, he has it all. He ran for governor once, but I believe now is the time that our nation needs someone like him if he chooses to serve. And we live in a climate right now. A lot of people like Jason Carter are a little leery about serving now.
Yeah.
Because it's a dog-eat-dog world out there right now when it comes to politics. But our nation needs people who are willing to serve and allow their faith and hope for our nation to be the guardrails of who we are. Currently, right now, we don't have guardrails. It's anything that goes.
Yeah.
And then we fight to the death instead of having compassion, compromise to get things done. And in between all of that, our people are suffering. When we had all the issues with our airlines, our government bailed out the airlines. When we had an issue with our banks, our government bailed out the banks. When we had an issue with real estate and the automobile industry, our government bailed them out. But when it comes to our people in our nation, we're trapped in the middle of a fight. Our school systems have not been bailed out yet. The people that are living in poverty have not been bailed out yet. Seniors who are trying to live day to day with Medicare have not been bailed out. In fact, they're afraid that they're going to take Medicare from them. When we look at ways of having leaders who care about the people, I just believe that if we had people in leadership that use their faith and the hope for our future of our nation as guardrails, then maybe, just maybe, when they raise their right hand, they'll think about the people that put them in office.
We're going to take a break because you're just hitting on all the points that the communities of color are concerned about. Education,
Yes.
Criminal justice system, police reform, economic opportunities. We're going to talk about that. But before we go to the break, we got to talk about the President's Club that was there. Because you were watching while these presidents and their wives were interacting with each other, snubbing each other. Yeah. There was Mike Pence. There was his wife, Karen, and how she refused to even look up. What were you thinking as you were watching all of this play out?
I was hoping that they could put down their pride and at a moment show the world that they can all come together and celebrate a man who put his character, his heart, his passion for his God on display and show America the best part that we could have. But it didn't play out that way.
Well, did they show it more towards Donald Trump as opposed to Jimmy Carter?
I would say they did.
Okay.
I would say they did.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, these individuals have to work together, support each other. And this is an exclusive community of individuals.
That's right.
As I watched on television the drama play out, the interactions, the greetings, the non-greetings, these individuals, these presidents, are privy to information that none of the rest of the country or the world is privy to.
That's right.
They know what really goes on behind the scenes. They know what's really happening with other countries and our relationship with them. So it's a very exclusive club of information that they share with each other. And to see them interact with each other, some in a good way and some like, I don't want to talk to you at all. It was quite interesting. But it speaks to the fact that we're still human beings.
Absolutely.
And they're still human beings.
Absolutely.
In spite of their positions of power. We're going to take a break. We'll come back. And I really want to focus on education and our criminal justice system.
Yeah.
All right?
Yes.
We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to more of the conversation with my guest, Pastor Tony Lowden. Now, we're going to switch into some other things, but you and I were talking during the break about something special that happened at the family dinner after the funeral, after the committal, right?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
So after the committal, they have a family dinner at this Methodist church. And Amy, as I walk in, my wife, she said, Tony, come here. I want to give you something. And there's a card in this box that she has. I said, you want me to open it now? She said, yes, I really want you to open it now. And she said, but I want you to open the card first. And the card was words from her saying, thank you for all you did for my parents and how my parents loved you and you meant a lot to them. And then she said, now open this. And I opened this one box. It was wrapped like a gift. And she said, I found this on my desk, and it was the ballot that when the church had elections to choose whether or not I was going to be their pastor, it had him checking the box yes with his signature on a JC in a frame. And she said, he left this on the desk for you, and so I'm giving it to you today.
Wow.
I have two things left from him. Actually, I have three. I have that ballot. I have this rum that he gave me from a presidential case because he brought a rum company to Reynolds, Georgia to boost up the economics there because they grow sugar canes there. Mm-hmm. And so he had the number 2 bottle from this case of 200. He gave me number 2, said, one day you'll open this and drink it. And I probably will never open it and drink it.
Of course not. You're going to keep that as a
Absolutely.
keepsake. You know, it's a beautiful testimony to what I can perceive as an assignment that you felt you had from God to this particular leader. The way it all came together. Switching gears, all right, you have been involved in issues around criminal justice. When African-American leaders meet and they talk about issues that continue in our society, especially around systemic racism, which some don't believe that it even exists, right? But we know it does. We know systems and structures are run by people.
Right.
And these people are not always moral or sensitive to the marginalized or the plight of the marginalized and disenfranchised. When it comes around criminal justice, we are concerned about the disproportionate number of African Americans who end up in the system, incarcerated. We're concerned about how policing is executed in communities of color. This has been something that you've responded to. Tell us about your work in the criminal justice world.
Well, I worked at the White House. I was a Reentry Czar for the whole country. And my job was to take all 16 federal agencies and line up their resources to help do something about criminal justice reform. Implement the First Step Act, implement compassionate release for those who are subject to COVID or have a compromised immune system or just too old to be in a prison anymore, right? To help get women who are pregnant home during COVID, right? And instead of being locked up in the federal prisons, and then going around creating best practices around the nation.
And this is under the Trump administration.
Under the Trump administration,
right?
absolutely.
Because the First Step Act was on a federal level, of course. It didn't get down to the state level because most of the incarcerated African Americans are
on the state level,
not federal. But it was a first step, and that was his response. And this was in his first his first term.
And prior to that, I worked for Governor Nathan Deal in Georgia here, where all I did was help turn around Georgia in criminal justice reform. We were dead last, and then we ended up being number 1, competing with Ohio. And we did some amazing things. We took over prisons. We retrained the guards inside the prisons. We connected all the agencies with one strategy. So the Department of Juvenile Justice, Community Supervisions, the Department of Corrections, all of them have one strategy. We, instead of having 5 different probation officers, 1 officer, 1 house. You go to cities right now, your children have a probation officer, the father have a probation officer, the grandfather have a probation officer, and they are all managing 1 house at the same time. We have to ask ourselves, people of color of our nation, how do we survive civil rights? How do we survive depression, Reconstruction, Jim Crow? How do we survive the plantation? How do we survive Vietnam, World War I, World War II? How do we survive all of that and have our children end up right back on the plantation? And the reason why I say that is because majority of our prisons in the South, and I've been to them, are on former plantations. Angola Prison in Louisiana is a former plantation. Parkland in Mississippi is a former plantation. I mean, I can go on and on. Most of our prisons in the South are surrounded by agriculture, cotton. We have men and women in our prisons in the South that are raising cattle, killing cattle, cutting them up, getting them to market for no revenue whatsoever going on their books. We have men doing major labor on farms right now still. And if the walls wasn't there, it would still be what?
You're talking 2024.
Absolutely.
Wow.
In some states in the South, we still have chain gangs.
Prison industrial complex.
Yes.
A reality, a present reality.
Yes.
So what caused you to gravitate to this?
I grew up in North Philadelphia, and the majority of the men in my family were in and out of prisons. I've seen it. I've seen it firsthand. The first time when Governor Nathan Deal asked me to work for him, one day I went to Phillips Prison, and Phillips Prison has a hospice inside the prison. And this one 80-year-old white woman said, come here, Tony, I want to show you something that no one wants you to see. And she took me to the hospice inside the prison. She said, they want you to go over and speak at the graduation. I want you to see the hospice. And I go in there to the hospice, and there's a guy laying there, and I said, brother, is there anything I can do for you? He said, can you get a preacher to come up here and pray for me? I'm a preacher. And he's asking, can I get someone to come up here and pray for him? And it just crushed me on the inside. He's knocking at the door. He's making his transition. He's done life, right? And here we are. We should send him home. Let him die with his family, right? And so it just made me more passionate about doing something about it. We have, in our nation, we have a shortage of correctional officers. We have failing schools that we can track that have become the pipeline to our prisons. We can show communities that are going through gentrification that are allowing our people who can't afford and become desperate, people who are doing desperate things, ending up in our prisons. We see veterans who are coming home from our longest wars, self-medicating themselves because of the trauma that they witnessed or went through in the wars. They're in and of our prisons. We have the mentally ill, the gang members, the veterans, all in one population in some of our prisons. And then we keep talking about reentry. We can't talk about reentry no more because it's not reentry. When it comes to the church, it's redemption. And then reentry with holistic programs to help men and women get away with the stigma. You know, I remember when Florida passed a law saying that you can now vote if you have a felony. But then they came back and passed some laws saying you got to have all your taxes paid for, you can't have no debt, your credit got to be right, all those different things. When do a person really get back into America after he's done his time?
Yeah.
And after he's paid his price? When do you give him an opportunity to run for president? When do you give him an opportunity to vote for a president, right? We have a shortage in labor in our nation. In Las Vegas, John Ponder, you and I both know him. He has a great system out there, 6% recidivism rate in his nonprofit program, the best in the nation. And he's got men and women working all throughout Vegas with CDLs and working in the casinos and doing all those things with jobs that pay a lot. We got to be able to do that now. Because if not, when we do reentry, people come back home and they sleep on our streets. When you drive to the airport or when you go to your next meeting, I want you to look at some of the underpass. When you go to D.C., look at the tents.
Yep, I'm aware.
New York. I mean, these are people who have been incarcerated are now on our streets, desperate.
What you're saying is there are things that can be done.
Oh, absolutely.
And we have to take that responsibility to do them.
The U.S. Chamber of Commerce, this is the business folks. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce says the best people to hire are people who have been justice involved because the retention rate for them are a lot longer than people who have never been justice involved.
Wow.
That's the U.S. And they want companies to hire individuals because they have a motivation to work and get back on their feet. But we put up all the barriers with collateral consequences. Well, you can learn, like California, the fires. 1,000 inmates are putting out fires in California right now, 1,000. But when they come home, they can't work for the fire department because of industrial occupation license. They can't get one.
Right.
There's something wrong with that.
Yeah. Do you think that you'll have opportunity to change some of these things under the new administration?
I'm currently working for a company now called Viapath Technologies, and I'm in the C-suites there. And we put technology in prisons all around the country, all around the world. And we're putting rehabilitation stuff on the tablets. We're putting education on the tablet, reintegration stuff on the tablets. There are transitional accountability plans on the tablets, helping me. I'm doing more now than I would have done when I was in the White House because I don't have election consequences right now or political games. It's going to take people like Congressman Collins, who could end up being the Secretary of Veteran Affairs, to be able to put the resources to help veterans who are incarcerated get back home and transition successfully. It's going to take Scott Turner, who is going to be the Secretary of HUD, to be able to provide housing for men and women who have been incarcerated. Because currently, right now, if you sold drugs or were on using drugs, you can't go back into public housing. But if you, God forbid, kill someone, you can go back. There's something wrong with those laws, right? We got to change that. We got to give people an opportunity. Just because people have been self-medicating, if you're living in the hood and all there is title ponds, liquor stores, hookah stores, and all those things that self-medicate you, and you're desperate, you can't feed your kids, sometimes you self-medicate yourself out of the trauma that you're in.
Yeah.
Because you don't have to be in prison to be in an invisible prison.
Right.
And growing up in the inner city communities where children are having to fight the roaches for the same government cheese that the government gives them, that's trauma. And you may grow up watching your parents in and out of jail. Now you self-medicate the same way they were self-medicating.
It goes on generationally.
Generationally.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
See, you made a comment that government cheese. Not everybody knows what government cheese is. You and I know what government cheese is.
We know what that government cheese is.
Yeah,
yes.
We know where that's coming from. But you sound hopeful. I mean, there are people who feel that things are hopeless for the community of color because of the new administration, because Trump is in power. We're going to have to see how this plays out. But I think a lot of it has to do with what we do within the community.
Absolutely.
How we use our own power. And I think you and I agree that the church plays a very important role
Absolutely.
in what happens socially, culturally, for the Black community.
Yeah.
We can go on and on, man.
Yeah.
Want to have you back on, talk a little bit more about your church and some other things that you're doing, and blessing of the elders. We didn't get to touch base on that, what brought you and I together as well. These are going to be interesting times.
It is.
And we're going to monitor what's happening and speak
Dr.
into
Bernard,
what's
if
happening.
I could say this as in closing, when Abraham Lincoln signed the documents to give African Americans freedom in this country, we call it Freedom Sunday, right? And we were hopeful during that time, and we survived. But prior to that, we survived the plantation. Not all of us did, but we survived it. Not all of us survived the trip through the Atlantic Ocean, but some of us did, and we came to this country and we built this country. A lot of us have passed on, and a lot of us have went to prisons, and a lot of us have died on the streets, and some of our children are still dying, but I'm still hopeful because we are a generation of people that have survived some of the worst things in our nation. Yeah. And we can still survive this. We have to get to the point where we don't look at each other as victims. I would love for us to be able to find a way to teach our children about the blood instead of having our kids fighting about the blood.
Really understand the history that's there.
Yes.
We have demonstrated incredible resilience over 400 years. Yes. And I don't know of any other people with that kind of a history. No. That's real, and we're living it out. I appreciate you, brother. All the things that you're doing. Appreciate our relationship and the ongoing work.
Yeah, you are amazing.
That's ahead of us.
You're the one. I mean, I would love to sit around you, and I challenge anyone that want to build ministry, change communities, come and see what CCC is doing in New York and around the country, because you have the model that can make it all work. And you don't have to take all the model, just take some pieces that work for your community.
Absolutely. and find out what works for your community and press it.
Absolutely.
Press your way through it all. All right. Thank you. Our guest, Professor, Doctor, Pastor, Brother Tony Lowden.
From the Trap House.
Amen.